Back in 1916, if a Russian general was looking for a promotion, a politician was trying to secure a minister's seat, or a businessman was hustling for a government contract, the official resume submission to the Tsar was a complete waste of paper. The only real career hack was grabbing a briefcase full of cash or a few bottles of bootleg alcohol, surviving the negative 30-degree winter of St. Petersburg, and lining up outside a sketchy apartment that smelled heavily of onions and cheap booze. The owner of that apartment was an illiterate peasant from the middle of nowhere in Siberia, who flat out boycotted showers, with greasy hair and clothes that looked like rags. Grigori Rasputin. While 170 million Russian citizens were working their socks off day and night, the entire political machinery of the global superpower was being run based on the hangover mood of a certified horse thief. Dry history textbooks love to paint this guy as a dark wizard with mystical voodoo powers, which sounds cool, but is mostly complete nonsense. If we break this down with modern logic, Rasputin wasn't a wizard. He was a straight-up sales genius, a master of psychological manipulation who found a massive security glitch in the royal system. He successfully hacked the brains of Europe's most powerful rulers using only two weapons: a tongue smoother than butter, and a dead-eyed stare that could sniff out your deepest anxieties. So grab your popcorn and let's see how a peasant systematically liquidated an entire empire. To see how this peasant systematically liquidated an entire empire, the timeline doesn't start in a fancy palace, but in a freezing, middle-of-nowhere village called Pokrovskoye in Siberia, back in 1869. Rasputin was born into a dirt-poor family, and he spent his youth building a rather sketchy resume. Illiterate, rowdy, a heavy drinker, and a frequent flyer at the local police station for his hobby of stealing his neighbor's horses. In a place where winter lasts forever and everyone is miserable, Rasputin quickly figured out a classic economic rule: if you keep digging frozen dirt, you're going to stay broke for the rest of your life. To level up, you need a product with higher profit margins, and he stumbled upon a gold mine of a niche market that never runs out of customers: spiritual comfort. At the age of 28, he decided to switch careers. He left his wife and kids behind, put on the ragged robes of a wandering monk, and started backpacking across Russia. He wasn't selling magic potions or holy water. The actual product Rasputin brought to the market was a specific skill sniffing out other people's anxieties. His startup strategy was fully optimized in 3 simple steps. Step 1. He practiced staring at people for minutes without blinking. Anyone looking into those big, wild eyes felt a sudden chill down their spine. Step 2. He would enter a village, find people stressed about illness or bad harvests, look them dead in the eye, and drop some vague philosophical line like, "I see a dark shadow loitering over your house." The peasants would instantly panic. "Oh, holy man, save me!" Step 3. Close the deal. He claimed to have a direct hotline to the heavens, making them believe he was the only person who could settle their spiritual debts. His street cred grew with every kilometer he walked. Rasputin understood that it doesn't matter what product you're selling, it matters what fear you are leveraging. And his ultimate VIP client was already waiting for him in the capital city. To lock in that ultimate VIP client, Rasputin packed his rags in 1903 and expanded his market directly to the capital, St. Petersburg. At the time, the wealthy aristocrats there were suffering from a classic case of rich people problems. Way too much cash, but completely empty inside. They were bored out of their minds by traditional lavish galas and became obsessed with mystical cults, fortune-telling, and seances. Rasputin showed up looking wild, unpolished, and smelling like literal swamp mud, but he instantly became the hottest new trend sweeping through high society salons. Everyone wanted to book the Siberian holy man just to flex their social status. And then, he landed the biggest contract in human history: Tsarina Alexandra. The royal family at the time was hiding a shocking crisis. Prince Alexei, the only heir to the throne, suffered from hemophilia. Back then, medicine was prehistoric, and the condition was a slow death sentence. A minor scratch or a clumsy trip could cause internal bleeding that would kill the boy. Imagine the psychological terror of the Tsarina watching her child bleed to death, while a mob of top-tier royal doctors covered in medals just shook their heads in total helplessness. In her moment of absolute despair, she heard about Rasputin and called him to the palace to try his luck. If this were a movie scene, the royal doctors would be like, "What is this ragged hobo even doing here? Is he going to cure disease with holy water? Step aside and let real science work." But Rasputin walked in, and the very first thing that he did was kick the doctors out of the room. He sat down by the prince's bed, held the boy's hand, and started whispering with an eerie level of absolute confidence. He told the child, "My boy, you are perfectly fine. The bleeding will stop. Now listen to me and go to sleep." And guess what? The bleeding actually stopped. The kid woke up fully alert as if nothing had happened. Now modern science has to enter the chat to explain this miracle. Rasputin didn't have voodoo magic. His absolute certainty and deep, soothing voice simply stopped the boy's panic. You see, when a child bleeds, they cry and get terrified, which skyrockets their heart rate and spikes their blood pressure, forcing more blood out. By calming the kid down, Rasputin lowered his heart rate and blood pressure, giving natural blood clots a chance to form. Plus, he told the Tsarina to stop giving the prince the doctor's medication, which at the time was often aspirin, a substance that literally thins the blood. Ironically, he saved the prince by stopping the doctors from poisoning him. But Tsarina Alexandra didn't care about science or blood pressure. She immediately fell to her knees. This is definitely a holy man sent by God. Just like that, an illiterate peasant successfully closed the ultimate deal, securing the absolute trust of the most powerful woman in Russia. He got himself a lifetime VIP pass straight into the brain of the empire, and nobody dared to question him. With a lifeline insurance policy backed by the royals, Rasputin instantly upgraded his lifestyle. He moved into a luxury apartment in the heart of the capital and turned it into a corporate headquarters / non-stop party central. He drank wine like water and hooked up with a long list of high society ladies, from ministers' wives to noble debutantes. When the tabloids started digging for dirt and politicians criticized the so-called holy man's wild lifestyle, Rasputin didn't sweat it. Instead, he dropped a loophole of sophistry that would go down in history. "My children, if you do not sin, you will never know true repentance. And if you do not repent, what exactly is God supposed to forgive you for? Therefore, if you want salvation, you must sin as enthusiastically as possible first." The aristocrats heard this and thought, "Wow, sounds completely absurd, but he makes a great point. Cheers to that, Holy Father." Absolute peak mental gymnastics. But the real drama started when he turned the Russian government into a literal family-run Ponzi scheme. The country's political hiring process became a running joke. If you were a general looking for a battlefield promotion or a politician aiming to become Minister of Finance, you didn't need to submit a resume or prove your competence. The only thing you had to do was bring a briefcase full of cash or some premium alcohol to Rasputin's doorstep. He would look you over to see whether you had shown enough respect. If you nodded, he'd scribble a note for the Tsarina. The next day, the Tsar would sign your appointment papers. Any competent ministers who actually had self-respect and dared to argue with Rasputin were booted out of the system in a heartbeat. A massive, global superpower was being run not by laws or grand strategies, but by the hangover moods of a certified horse thief. Everything hit the fan in 1914, when World War I broke out. Tsar Nicholas II made one of the worst strategic moves in history. He headed straight to the front lines to personally command the army, leaving the home front entirely in the hands of the Tsarina. This meant Rasputin officially became the shadow CEO with absolute control over the country. He fired anyone with actual talent and replaced them with sycophants so incompetent they couldn't even read a military map. The result? The economy completely tanked, and inflation went through the roof. Citizens lined up for miles in freezing weather, starving enough to eat tree bark, while the army at the front suffered loss after loss because they literally didn't have enough bullets to shoot. Realizing the country was driving straight off a cliff, a group of high-ranking nobles, led by Prince Felix Yusupov, the richest man in Russia at the time, decided this peasant had to be eliminated to save the nation. On a cold December night in 1916, they invited Rasputin over to Yusupov's palace for a party, and the most ridiculous assassination plot in history officially kicked off. To prepare, they laced the cakes and wine on the table with massive amounts of cyanide. This stuff is so toxic that a tiny speck is enough to drop a grown man in seconds. Rasputin walked in, cheerfully ate every single pastry, and knocked back several glasses of poison wine. The nobles stood around, sweating bullets, waiting for him to drop dead. But nope, Rasputin just casually burped and turned to Yasipov. "Hey brother, great cakes, but when is the actual dinner coming out? I'm still kind of hungry." The nobles were probably screaming in absolute terror internally. Panicking at this point because the guy was completely immune to poison, Yasipov pulled out a revolver, aiming at Rasputin's chest, and pulled the trigger. Bang! A bullet went straight through his heart. Rasputin collapsed on the floor, bleeding out. The nobles sighed in relief and celebrated, thinking the century-long drama was finally over. But history always delivers the craziest plot twists. When Yasipov leaned down to check the body, Rasputin's creepy, wide eyes snapped open. He jumped up like a literal zombie in a horror flick, let out a terrifying scream, and started strangling Yasipov. The nobles scattered in pure panic. Rasputin let go of Yasipov, ran for the door, and bolted out into the freezing snow in the middle of the winter night. The frozen nobles took a few seconds to process this, then pulled their guns and chased him outside. They shot him 4 more times in the back and head until he finally collapsed on the snowbank. To be 100% sure he wouldn't come back to life again, they tied his limbs with ropes, stuffed him into a heavy canvas sack, cut a hole in the frozen Nevka River, and threw him into the icy current. A few days later, the police found his body trapped under the ice, and the autopsy results sent a collective shiver down Russia's spine. There was water in Rasputin's lungs. Do you realize what that means? It means he didn't die from enough cyanide to kill a whole platoon, and he didn't die from bullets to the heart and head. The man was still breathing when they threw him into the river. The autopsy even showed he had tried to untie the ropes and push his way out of the sack under the freezing water before running out of oxygen. Rasputin was finally gone, ending the life of the most stubborn and resilient manipulator in history. But right before his death, he left one final curse for the Tsar in a letter. "If I'm killed by royal nobles, remember this. Not a single member of your family will survive past 2 years. Everyone will be punished." And guess what? The horse thief's curse came true with terrifying precision. Within 2 years of the assassination, the Russian Revolution erupted, and the Romanov dynasty collapsed in a single night. The entire royal family, including Tsarina Alexandra and Prince Alexei, was dragged down to a dark basement in Siberia and executed, closing the weirdest, most chaotic, and ironic chapter in the history of global power. An empire's power structure might look massive and unbreakable from the outside, but it always has human glitches rooted in fear and greed. And it only takes one bold, reckless guy who understands behavioral psychology to bring the whole thing crashing down. If you found this historical Ponzi scheme entertaining, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next royal dramas. Until next time, take care and see ya.